Now these are Snapdragons and we sowed these in the Autumn Jump Starter. I'm gonna sow another round now with you. There isn't very many things that I successional sow, but Snapdragons have got a very long flowering period. And what tends to happen is these will bloom, depending on the weather, from around late May onwards. And then just as they start to get tired, we can give them a really good chop them right down, and then they should rebloom. But in that window between us cutting them and the new flowers appearing, the spring started or late winter started Snapdragons will be at their very best. So not only have you got fresh flowers, but you'll have a continuous supply of them all summer. So you've got the Autumn Jump Starter at the back, which are taller, can you see? And then these are the late winter spring started. So they're a bit shorter and they're later, but I wouldn't be without doing 2 sowings. It's the 3rd of August and you can see that for the most part the Autumn Jump Starter Snapdragons have all been dead-headed and they're all budding up to rebloom, but we've still got fresh blooms coming through. This is from a slightly later spring sowing. Now Snapdragons, especially the autumn started ones, will become very tall and the flowers can actually be a bit too big for your vases and arrangements. So what we do is we pinch out the tips. Now I don't know if you can see already, we've got little side shoots coming up, and you might even have some side shoots appearing at the base, and you might think that you don't need to pinch them because they're already doing their thing. Now, what happens is you get something called apical dominance, which means the hormone in the top of the plant is encouraging the plant to go upwards at the expense of these side shoots. So if we pinch out the hormone and the top of the plant, that will take that hormone away and apical dominance will go away, and these side shoots will then be able to grow strongly, and we'll get 3 or 4 stems for the price of 1. So I've got my trusty snips so I can show you properly. So the taller plants, now you can actually take cuttings from them. So if you wanted to take a cutting, you want to cut it a bit lower, down to about here. So you've got some good cutting material. But otherwise you can just pinch out the very top like that, and that will give you a slightly bigger plant. Now if you've got any really small plants, for example, the only difference is these just germinated a bit later, so you don't want to take off too much of the leaf area because otherwise I'll have nothing left to photosynthesize. So I'm just going to take out that section there. You can see the 2 little nodes already there, and now I've removed this, those little nodes will wake up. We'll come back and visit these in a couple of weeks. I can also see that the plants look a little bit hungry and a little bit thirsty, so I'm going to give them a seaweed feed. There we go. Now with Snapdragons, they can suffer from something called rust. Now these are young plants, so they should be absolutely fine. But as a precaution, try not to water the foliage. If you overhead water Snapdragons, you can increase the risk of rust. So wherever possible, don't water the leaves on these ones. So I'm just going to go ahead and finish off pinching out the rest of this tray of Snapdragons, and while I do that I'm going to run a video for you now showing you what Snapdragons look like once they've branched. Yeah, look, see that one's got 3 stems now, so that's excellent. 2 stems there. This one, look, I've forgotten this one, so I'm just going to pinch the top out with my fingers because it's only young. The younger the better, really. I'd just been leaving the others as an example so that I could explain. So next we're going to be sowing the spring started or late winter started Snapdragons. It's page 28 of your Spring Grow Along handbook. I have included it in the new handbook just because the information has been updated to take into account the fact that it's no longer autumn, where we're able to germinate the seeds really easily in a cold greenhouse because the environment was naturally warm and humid. At this time of the year, we're going to have to fake conditions a bit to encourage them into growth. So I've got here my usual gritty compost mix, which I have firmed to make sure there's no air pockets. And these are my Snapdragon seeds. Can you see how small they are? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attempt to scoop up one seed at a time. 3 there we go. And I'm going to sow one seed per cell onto the surface of the compost because they need light for germination, so you don't want to cover them. Now, if you find this a bit too tricky, then you can always sow a few seeds into a single tray and then prick them out later. I just find it easier if I can navigate the seed sowing into the cells. I can just leave them to get on with it. Oh, one more, there you go. Don't forget your label, and I'm going to water them from underneath because the seeds are so tiny we don't want to dislodge them. So just water the tray from underneath for about 20 minutes. So you'll notice from the handbook that the Snapdragons require between 18 and 21 degrees of steady temperature to encourage germination. So I'm very lucky I've got electrics and a heat mat in my greenhouse. So I'm going to pop them on there with a propagator lid on top, because what that will do is it will trap any moisture. Heat mats can encourage the compost to dry out really quickly, and the propagator lid will trap that moisture, keeping the environment around the seed warm and humid. That's had 20 minutes of soaking, and then I've also allowed it to drain so it doesn't make the side all wet, and I'm going to pop this on my heat mat. Now, if you don't have a propagator or a heat mat in your greenhouse, then you can certainly germinate them indoors. A heat mat even indoors will encourage the germination. If you don't have a heat mat at all, you can certainly just germinate them on a warm windowsill. They just might take a little bit longer. Watch out for their compost drying out. Put a lid on them if you've got one. If not, just keep a close eye on the compost. And then as soon as you see germination, if you're indoors, as soon as you see germination, you need to bring them out to the light as soon as possible, because otherwise what will happen is the stems will elongate in their search for light. And because Snapdragon seedlings are so tiny anyway, the stems can be almost hair thin, and then they might not be strong enough to support themselves later. Go and put the propagator lid on the top. I do expect this to mist up now because the compost is moist and the environment will trap the humidity, and that will help the seeds germinate.